Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. Need some inspiration as you navigate military life, moves, deployments, raising military kids, keeping your marriage together, career issues, and more? Get an encouraging, humorous outlook from a spouse who's been there for 30 years. Join host Jen McDonald, author of You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, who knows that we're stronger together. Jen also writes regularly for outlets such as Military Spouse Magazine and has been featured in numerous books and national publications. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sit back and relax as Jen talks with military spouses both new and experienced who will give you realistic hope and support for your own MilSpouse journey.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm Jen, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. If you haven't yet, I hope you'll take a minute to connect with MilSpouse Matters on Instagram and Facebook, as well as enter the giveaway on Instagram that's still going on. It'll close out, I believe, on March 28th. So last week's guest, Claire Wood from Milspo Gurus, is offering a free copy of her book, Mission Ready Marriage, as well as a free enrollment into the Milspo Gurus course, Becoming Your Own Guru. So go check it out. I'm only taking entries on Instagram, and I'll link to that. Also, my newsletter, An Encouraging Word, came out today. So I'm sending out a monthly newsletter with resources and encouragement for you, so you can subscribe to that. All of these will be linked in the show notes to make it easy for you. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming up. Oh, before I get to that, there is also a Christian Military Spouses Facebook group. You can join that little community. We take prayer requests and just share whatever's happening, and spouses from all the branches are on there. The only way you can get in is to answer the questions. So if you go find it on Facebook and ask to join, please answer the questions or you won't be added, because we do want to make sure that you're a military spouse to just keep the community what it was intended to be. So I hope to see you there. Today we're talking about strengthening your military marriage. And before we get too much into that, I wanted to mention a couple of resources. One of the books that's been recommended to me by several guests is the 5 Love Languages Military Edition. I'm not a big fan of marriage books just because I feel like everybody's marriage is different and individual, and what works for one family won't work for you. And we'll get more into that in just a minute. But that is one that I haven't read it, but I've had people that I respect really recommend that. And another book I wanted to recommend is one that I have read. And this isn't necessarily marriage specific. It's more about finding contentment with where God has you. And I think as military spouses, we often find ourselves in that transition phase more often than not. So it's called The Land Between: Finding God in Difficult Transitions by Jeff Mannion. And again, all of these things that are mentioned will be linked. So that one is a great one to just kind of help you through those tough times. So let's talk about what's coming up. April is the month of the military child, and I'm really excited to be bringing you some guests that will be talking about things to do with military kids. So one of them is Judy Davis, who's amazing. If you haven't heard of her, you will love to hear her speak. She's going to talk about parenting teens as military parents. Elaine Byer is coming on to talk about when your child decides to go into the military. Many of us are there. And then I'm having book author Renee Walker on to talk about her new book for military kids going through a deployment. So always great to have those kind of resources. So be looking for that. Another project in the works that I've been working on for a couple of years and hopefully will be finishing this year is a book about some of the widows and couples from the Air Force Enlisted Village. And they are Korean War and Vietnam era spouses who now live in basically a retirement community. So that's been very rewarding and exciting. So I will tell you more information about that as we go along. So on to the topic of the day, which is strengthening your military marriage. If you don't know anything about me, I will fill you in a little bit. We have been married. It'll be 31 years this summer and have 4 kids. And our oldest is also in the Air Force. My husband retired from the Air Force. It'll be 2 years this spring, which is hard to believe because it doesn't seem like it's been that long. One thing that we are often asked about is how did we make it work? Because we went through what most military families go through, which is the upheavals and the moving and deployments and time apart. Even the last decade of his career, he actually traveled more than he was home. And so that's probably a topic for another episode, is how do you come back together when you're used to being very independent? But actually, we might want to cover that today too, just because the fact as a military spouse, you have to be so independent and figure things out. And you do need to plan ahead, because this will not always be your life, to allow room for them when they're home or when they retire. So I'm going to close out today's episode with the reading from my book that's about connecting. But before we get to that, I wanted to give you my tips. And then I asked on social media, my main writer page on Facebook, for tips from spouses that have been married for 10 years or more. And the reason I did that was just because to have a little bit of longevity so that you could get advice from people that have made it work longer term. And I'll give my big disclaimer for this: take what works for you, leave behind what does not ring true for you. But I thought this is a great way to share some wisdom from other people. So here are my tips, having been married for 31 years. So probably the number one, and I think we would both say this, is have a sense of humor. Don't take yourself too seriously. In fact, one of the babies that we have, I had a very, very long labor, and it was in the late 90s, and Whose Line Was It Anyway was on the TV in the labor room. And so between contractions, because everybody didn't automatically get an epidural back then, we would just watch it and I would laugh. And we actually had nurses coming to the door, probably like hour 12. They'd open the door and they'd be like, there's that couple that's laughing between contractions. And it just kind of struck me that, wow, is it that unique? I figured everybody was like that. But really look for the lighter side. Don't take yourself too seriously. You have to laugh about things, especially in military life. The second one would be communication. And we're going to get some tips about that from other spouses. And I would say, yes, communicate, but also sometimes, how do I word this? Don't overdo it. Sometimes communication can be overrated. And I know that sounds very contradictory to most advice, but just because you think something, just because you feel something, doesn't mean you need to verbalize it, because it can do more harm than good at times. And so I don't think I want him telling me every little thing I do that annoys him. So I try not to do that to him either. Okay, so we said, keep your sense of humor, communicate wisely. The next tip is find joy in the small things. Be grateful. I feel like military spouses do such a good job of this because we are apart. We do have hardships. I think we have a greater propensity to really see joy in the little things and not take things for granted. But it's a good reminder. My next tip would be, don't look to a person to fill needs that only God can fill. And what do I mean by that? If I look to my spouse, whether you're a person of faith or not, but if you look to a person to be your be-all, end-all, you are setting yourself up for disappointment, because people are fallible, people mess up. And there's no person in the world that can fill that need for you. And it's a lot of pressure on that other person if you stop and think about it. Only God can fill all your needs. There's only one perfect person, and this is my belief that it's God. So don't look to another person to fill needs that were designed to only be filled by God. My last tip would be, well, I guess this is kind of two in one. When we were first married, we had somebody wiser than us tell us, he would always say, lower your expectations, raise your appreciation. And that is so helpful. And along those lines is don't compare. Don't compare your partner's strengths and weaknesses to other people. When we were very first married and I started staying home, the church I was going to had what they called a mom support group. I was a brand new mom and I thought, oh, this will be great. I'm going to go and meet these other ladies and going to learn so much. And really what it was a bunch of people just griping. And I'd come home almost mad at my husband. And I thought, this is not what I need. This is not what he needs. It's not fair to him. So don't compare, just have realistic expectations and be appreciative. So let me just add this disclaimer, which I should have said at the beginning. I am obviously not talking about abusive situations or adultery or something that's more than just the everyday trials of marriage. If that's something you're going through, please seek out help. Please go find a counselor or go to your chaplain. I would never excuse that kind of behavior. This is more for the dailiness of marriage and just typical marriage issues. So that said, I am going to go to some amazing spouses that shared on my Facebook page. And I'm going to just use first names because I don't know how to pronounce some of the last names. So here we go. I thank you guys so much for sharing. I think this will help other military spouses. So here's some advice from other, what I will say, seasoned military spouses. Okay, so Ashley shares, make a real attempt to see things from both sides when you're butting heads, and you will. It's important to remember that new jobs and life changes bring new challenges and stressors, and as we grow and change, our reactions do the same. Communication is so important, but compassion and an attempt to put yourself in your partner's shoes, at least I found, helps quell my frustrations and makes me more likely to want to help my partner through difficult times rather than become combative, which can lead to all sorts of unnecessary feelings. Amen to that, sister. Good advice. And along those same lines, Claire from our last week's episode, she said she's been married 17 and a half years, and her best advice is when they feel like they're at an impasse or arguing, one of them will stop and use the phrase, same team. It's kind of our reset button and a reminder that no matter our differences of opinion and no matter the offense, we are rowing the same boat. And then she said, sorry for the mixed metaphors, which cracked me up, but totally true. Remember, you're on the same team. You want this to work out, right? You don't want to win at all costs, because then what do you really win? So then Alicia says, what's made their marriage work is mandatory monthly date nights, intentionally catching up on our day every day, laughing together, strategically and intentionally finding opportunities to laugh, whether it's a comedy club date night, silly family game night, or playing silly pranks on each other, having mini truth sessions where we sit down facing each other and just blab anything out with the promise of not getting angry, anything that's been annoying us, anything we can help the other, anything that we hope the other might work on, and also making sure we also help each other prioritize self-care. So that may fit for you, because I know some of us don't do so well at taking care of ourselves, and we need that reminder from our partner. Danette says, we used a marriage journal. I'd write in it and tuck in his deployment or TDY bag. Then he'd find it and read it while he was gone and reply. Sometimes he actually mailed it back. I love this idea. Realize how much stress they're under. If every time they're off, we present a honey-do list, travel plans to see family, or your own agenda, we don't allow their downtime to be truly restful. That added stress makes a huge difference in the long run. Join him in doing what recharges his batteries. Heather says communication is huge, whether you come to an agreement or not. Talking and understanding each other's perspective, being flexible and open-minded will help as well. A military marriage will bring things into your life you've never been exposed to that will create opportunities and obstacles. Be aware of who you are as an individual and as a couple. You are just as important to this relationship. Don't feel as though it should get easier with time or with each new PCS. Have the expectation that you will learn new ways to cope, evolve, and new ways to grow, because you will change in ways that will surprise you. And that is so true. Just because you've moved 10 times or been through several deployments, and you can refer back to Lizanne Lightfoot's episode where she talks about deployment. She went through it 7 times, and she said, you feel like it should get easier. It doesn't really get easier. You just get stronger. Meg Flanagan, who was also a past guest, says honesty, sometimes brutal honesty about how you're feeling, major decisions, talk over his career options together, his or her career options together is really important. Weigh the pros and cons of each move and how it impacts your employment options, childcare, etc. Take time together and apart to recharge and reconnect. Here's a simple one from Lisa, which I love. Do everything in love. Sherry says sense of humor and honesty. Nikki says, we still laugh every day together. I don't remember a day that we didn't laugh at ourselves about something. We chose a long time ago to not take life too seriously. And then a couple more. Brittany from Mil Spouse Coffee House says, I'm a mil spouse of 11 years. My advice to new military spouses is to stay busy and get connected. It helps to have military spouse friends. Give the FRG Spouse Club a try, whatever it's called in your branch. Not all are the same. And also don't forget to get involved with local civilian friends too. Totally agree with that. There's been a couple of bases where my friends were all not related to the military. And that was actually good because they weren't involved at all. And I didn't have to worry about any kind of, I don't want to say drama, but it was just good to have that different civilian perspective. So don't forget about your civilian friends. They can be a great resource as well. And then Rebecca said, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Our key to a good marriage has been to keep intimacy alive. They don't use sex as a reward or a punishment. And despite what else is happening, from crazy army stuff to kids who don't stop interrupting our conversations, we're still connecting. So thank you everyone for your input. I think you can find a little gem in there that might apply to your situation. And so I'm going to close with a reading from my book. I hope you don't mind. This is my book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse. And the way it's divided up, I have, sorry, you can probably hear me turn the pages. It's by category topic. So your identity, your friendships, your marriage, life of transition, moving, deployments, military families and kids, and God is there in the small moments. And so each section will have a little story, and then basic training for spouses, which is basically kind of my tips, and then scripture and a little prayer. So this one I thought really applied to our topic today. And I thought it would make more sense if I read it versus try to reword it. So the quote is, "A successful marriage requires falling in love many times, always with the same person. You make that decision every single day." And this is the reading from day 14 called Feed the Fish. So this is a book of 30 daily readings. And if you want to check it out, you can look on Amazon, and it has excerpts in there that you can read. Of course, what I'm reading is one, and then I'll link to it. So this is called Feed the Fish. We're hitting the age when it seems that many of our contemporaries, including couples who've been together for decades, are quietly divorcing. They've grown apart. They've had long-standing issues. The pressures of military life have proven to be greater than the love that's only a memory now. The kids are grown, and they find themselves married to a stranger. One evening, I was in the kitchen busily prepping dinner in a rush so I could get back to my laptop to finish some editing work. "Do you want to feed the fish?" my husband asked. Covered with flour from baking, thinking of all my deadlines, I nodded and wiped off my hands. Feeding the fish for us meant, "Will you come be with me a while?" During our assignment in Hawaii, one of our favorite things to do was walk to the channel behind our house and watch the multicolored tropical fish surface to snatch at the crumbs we threw. We saw all kinds of fish there: angelfish, clownfish, parrotfish, barracuda, and several times even baby hammerhead sharks. We took our time watching the fish and talking. It was a moment to step away from the busyness of life, to do something not necessarily productive, to enjoy nature. As we tossed bread into the water, we reviewed the day, caught up, and reconnected. When you've been married a long time like we have, it's easy to forget how much those simple moments mean, but to me, they are more important than jewelry or a fancy date. It means my husband still loves me, longs for my company. It is hard for me to, quote, "do nothing," but then I remember, it is something. This is the most important relationship in my life. I hope that, whatever it means in your own marriage, you'll take time to feed the fish. Every marriage has its challenges, but throw in all the stressors that come with military life, and it's a tricky balancing act. You need to be an independent spouse, able to get along when you're by yourself, yet still make space in your home and heart so that your spouse feels needed when he's there. There are readjustments after deployments, extended family issues, and even at times, being the only friend the other has. A military marriage can falter under such intensity, so it's best to have your eyes wide open about the challenges so you're not surprised. Now, here's the basic training for spouses part. Staying connected with your spouse requires time and effort whether or not you have children. If you have a spouse who travels a lot like mine does, it can be a challenge to maintain life at home and yet make them feel welcomed into family life when they return. Here are some tips for staying connected. Number 1, find a mutual interest. For us, it's biking, hiking, and reality TV. Yes, we're a little nuts. But when he's on the road, we compare notes on the latest episode of Survivor or The Amazing Race, or discuss the latest antics on Dance Moms. That's when it was still on. When we're together, we enjoy exploring new hiking and nature trails together. Number 2, speak well of your spouse. Your spouse's heart should completely trust in you. They should know that when they're absent, you're not complaining about them. You should be able to have that same trust in return. Number 3, pray for your spouse. Though this may not seem like an action, it really is. Praying regularly for your spouse has the benefit of keeping your heart softened. By seeing him through God's eyes, you'll be reminded to lean towards mercy and love without conditions or strings attached. Pray for your marriage overall and your spouse as an individual, even if you're in the middle of a squabble, especially then. And here are a couple of scriptures. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. That's Philippians 1, 9 through 11. And here's a couple of verses from Ecclesiastes 4. 2 are better off than 1, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, two people lying close together can keep each other warm, but how can one be warm alone? Here's the think about it. What does feeding the fish mean for your marriage? What can you do today to cultivate closeness with your spouse? And I'll tell you this, if you are apart, you can still have closeness. You can still reach out, send notes, pray for them, think about them, talk well of them. And I would love to hear from you. What are your tips for military marriage and keeping it strong through all the stresses of military life? I would love to hear from you. So that's it for today. I hope it helped you in some way. Don't forget to find me on social media, sign up for the newsletter, and I would love to hear from you. Have a great week.
Connect with Jen at jenmcdonald.net or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also purchase her book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Love the show? Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, have a great week.